What would you do if you saw a wounded German shepherd trembling in the back of a stranger's truck? Caleb Wren had only stepped out after a long day fixing heat in a snowy Montana town. But one look at that dog's scarred neck and silent eyes told him this was not just neglect. He bought the dog to save him from a cruel man, never knowing the animal had once carried another name. Soon, Caleb discovered a rescue home that looked holy from the front, but hid suffering behind closed doors. And when the truth finally stood under the golden lights of a town fundraiser, one broken dog found his voice again. Stay with this story, then tell us where you're watching from, and if it moves you, please like and subscribe to help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers and bring more stories like this to life. Caleb Wren had spent most of that winter crawling under old houses, listening to furnaces cough like dying animals. Whitefish, Montana was beautiful in the way only cold places could be beautiful mercilessly, without asking permission. Snow settled on pine branches in clean white layers. The lake froze in broad sheets of dull silver. At sunset, the mountains looked less like stone than sleeping giants under blue blankets. People came to Caleb when warmth failed. That was his work now. Not raids, not briefings, not maps spread across metal tables. Just frozen pipes, cracked heat exchangers, stubborn pilot lights, and elderly furnaces that had decided, usually at the worst possible hour, to surrender. He drove from house to house in a dark pickup with a toolbox in the back and a coil of spare ducting that rattled whenever the road turned rough. It was honest work, quiet work, and Caleb preferred quiet. At 52, he still carried the frame of a man built by discipline. He stood around 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a lean, solid body that had not softened much with age. His face had a weathered, romantic severity to it, the kind that made strangers glance twice but hesitate to speak. Brown hair, cut short but not military short, had gone silver at both temples. A short 2-day beard darkened his jaw. His eyes, gray hazel, steady and tired, looked at the world, as if measuring distance, weather, and danger all at once. He wore his usual olive-drab combat shirt, fitted through the torso, with camouflage sleeves and dark horizontal bands around the upper arms. Over it, he had thrown on a charcoal canvas work jacket, smudged with dust from the Juniper Grill's basement furnace. The Juniper Grill sat on the edge of town, where Main Street loosened into road and road became mountain. It was not fancy. It had a red neon sign that buzzed when the temperature dropped, a pie case near the register, and coffee strong enough to wake the dead and irritate the living. Caleb had spent 4 hours in its utility room, persuading a failing heating unit not to abandon the building before dinner rush. By the time he stepped out the back door, the sky had turned pale steel. Snow drifted down lightly. Not a storm yet, just a warning. It collected on the hoods of parked trucks, on the blacktop, on the lid of the dumpster by the fence. The cold touched Caleb's face and settled into the small cuts across his knuckles. Behind him, Ruth Mallory called from the kitchen door, "You sure you won't take coffee for the road?" Caleb turned halfway. Ruth was 61, short and sturdy, with silver hair cut to her chin and a denim apron tied over a plaid shirt. Her face had the permanent pinkness of someone who moved between hot griddles and winter air all day. She held a dish towel in one hand, like a judge holding a gavel. "I've had 3, Caleb said. "That's breakfast." "It's 5 in the afternoon. Then you're behind." Caleb almost smiled. Almost. Ruth had owned the Juniper Grill long enough to know when a man wanted conversation and when he needed the mercy of not being asked for any. She let him go with a grunt and disappeared back inside, where plates clattered and someone laughed too loudly near the counter. Caleb crossed the back lot toward his pickup. He was reaching for the door handle when he heard the shout. "Move, you useless thing!" The voice came from the far side of the lot, behind a red pickup parked crooked near the snowbank. It was not the kind of shout used to move livestock or call across wind. It was smaller than that, meaner. The kind of voice a man used when he needed something weaker than himself to feel afraid. Caleb stopped. He did not turn quickly. Old instincts had not died. They had simply learned to wear work boots. He shifted his weight, let his hand fall from the truck door, and looked across the falling snow. A man stood by the red pickup with a short wooden stick in one hand and a rope in the other. Caleb knew the type before he knew the face. Big enough to intimidate people who did not like trouble. Loose in the middle, heavy in the shoulders, angry before anyone had given him a reason. His jacket was brown and stained, his black knit cap pulled low, his beard uneven along a reddened jaw. Cold and liquor had painted his face the same raw color. Warren Pike. Caleb had seen him twice before at the grill, once arguing about a bill, once loading crates into his truck while Ruth watched from the window with her mouth pressed thin. Warren yanked the rope. Something shifted in the pickup bed. Caleb moved 3 steps closer. At first, he saw only a shape tucked against the inside wall of the truck bed, half hidden behind a rusted wire crate and a rolled tarp. Then the shape lifted its head. A German shepherd. Male, maybe 6 years old, black and tan under all the dirt. Too thin. Not just hungry thin, but used up thin, ribs pressing faintly through matted fur, hips sharp beneath the coat. Snow had collected along his back, melting into dark streaks. One front leg trembled as he tried to keep weight off it. Around his neck, the fur lay twisted and broken in a pale ring where something had rubbed too long and too hard. But it was the eyes that made Caleb's breath slow. Amber dark, exhausted, watching. The dog did not bark. He did not snarl. He did not fling himself against the truck bed or shrink into mindless panic. He held still, as if stillness had once been the only safe thing he knew. Warren raised the stick. "I said move." The shepherd flinched. Not much, just enough. Caleb's hand closed once, slowly, at his side. There were many kinds of anger. He had known the loud kind, the reckless kind, the kind that made young men stupid and old men ashamed. This was not that. This came cold and clean, like a blade pulled from snow. "Put the stick down," Caleb said. Warren turned. His eyes narrowed as he looked Caleb up and down work jacket, old boots, gray at the temples, the calm posture that did not advertise itself. "This ain't your business." "It is now." Warren gave a short laugh. "That so?" Caleb walked closer, stopping a few yards away, close enough to see the dogs breathing, far enough not to crowd him. "What are you doing with him?" "My dog." Warren jerked the rope again, and the shepherd's body tightened. Bought him, fed him, tried to make him useful. Turns out he's no good. The dog's eyes moved briefly to Caleb. Not pleading, assessing. That was worse. Caleb had worked around dogs, trained for hard jobs. Not as their main handler, not the man with the whistle and praise and daily bond, but close enough to learn the difference between wild fear and trained restraint. A stray looked everywhere. A beaten pet cowered from everyone. This dog watched the man who had just arrived and tried to decide if he was another threat or the first possible door. Warren spat into the snow. "Needs teaching." Caleb looked at the stick, then at the rope, then at the dog. For one brief second, the world offered him the easy thing. Step in, knock Warren into the snow, take the dog. Let the body do what the body remembered. It would have been satisfying in the ugly, useless way violence sometimes pretended to be justice. But the dog was still in the truck. Warren still held the rope, and men like Warren did not care what got hurt when their pride was cornered. So Caleb swallowed the blade. "How much?" he asked. Warren blinked. "What?" "How much for the dog?" A grin crawled across Warren's face. It was not pleasant. "You serious?" Caleb did not answer. Warren glanced at the shepherd, then back at Caleb, suddenly seeing not rescue, but profit. 500. The number was absurd. The dog needed a vet. Maybe surgery, maybe months of care, maybe trust that could not be bought at all. Caleb reached into his jacket. Warren's grin widened. From the kitchen door, a voice snapped, "Caleb?" Ruth had come back outside. She stood under the yellow porch light with her dish towel still in hand, her eyes moving from Caleb to Warren to the dog in the truck bed. Her face changed. The sharpness stayed, but something older moved beneath it. She had seen enough. "Ruth," Caleb said without looking away from Warren, "you have one of those receipt pads?" Warren's grin faltered. "What's that for?" "A sale needs writing." "It's a dog, not a house." "Then writing it should be easy." The snow continued to fall between them, small white pieces of silence. Ruth disappeared inside and came back with a yellow receipt slip and a pen. She did not ask questions. That was one of her gifts. She knew when the soup needed salt, when a trucker was lying about being fine, and when a man was holding himself together by one thin thread. Caleb took the paper and held it against the side of his pickup. "Name," he said. Warren hesitated. Caleb looked at him. "Warren Pike," the man muttered. Caleb wrote it down. Date, time, location. One German Shepherd, male, transferred for cash. He made Warren sign. "You some kind of lawyer?" Warren said. "No." "Cop?" "No." "Then why all this?" Caleb folded the receipt once and put it into his jacket pocket. "Because people forget what they said when they're ashamed later." Warren's face hardened. "I ain't ashamed of nothing. That's the problem." For a moment, the lot became very still. Ruth shifted by the door. Caleb heard the faint buzz of the diner sign, the hiss of tires out on the road, the dog's uneven breath from the truck bed. Warren looked as if he might swing the stick just to remind the world he could. Caleb did not move. He did not lift his hands. He only watched. At last Warren shoved the rope toward him. "Take the broken thing." Caleb accepted the rope but did not pull it. The shepherd's body locked. "Easy," Caleb said, low. The dog's ears twitched. Caleb did not climb into the truck bed. He did not reach over the dog's head. He lowered the tailgate slowly, giving the shepherd space to see every movement. Warren snorted behind him. "He won't come!" Stubborn mutt. Caleb ignored him. The dog stared at the open tailgate. Snow touched his muzzle. His front leg shook. Caleb crouched, not fully kneeling in the wet lot, but lowering himself enough to make his body smaller. "You don't have to understand me yet," he said softly. "Just don't give up right now." The shepherd's eyes met his. Then Caleb saw it. Caught in the dog's matted shoulder fur was a dry brown burr, the kind that came from thorn bushes along the fence lines outside town. Then another near his flank, and another tangled beneath his ear. The poor creature looked as if he had crawled through winter's crown of thorns and survived by refusing to bleed where anyone could see. Something inside Caleb shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, more like an old lock giving way. "Hawthorne," he murmured. Ruth, standing nearby, heard him. "What?" "Nothing." But the dog's ears moved again. Caleb held out one hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. The shepherd did not come to the hand. Not yet. But he leaned forward enough to smell the air between them. Warren scoffed. "You name all your bad purchases?" Caleb looked over his shoulder. "Leave." Warren's mouth tightened. This time, he seemed to notice something he had missed before. Caleb was not bluffing. There was no performance in him, no loud threat to answer with a louder one. Just a line in the snow, clean and final. Warren backed away, muttering. He climbed into his red pickup, slammed the door, and started the engine. As he pulled out of the lot, Caleb turned slightly, enough to see the license plate. He memorized it. Ruth, sharp as a hawk in an apron, raised her phone and took a picture. "Camera caught him too," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "Save it." "Already planning to." The red truck disappeared onto the road, its taillights bleeding into the pale snowfall. Only then did Caleb turn back to the dog. The shepherd had not moved from the pickup bed. His body was trembling harder now, as if the danger leaving had given him permission to feel what he had been holding back. Caleb stepped closer. "Easy," he said again. This time, when he reached in, the dog did not recoil. Caleb slid one arm under the chest, the other carefully behind the hindquarters. The shepherd was lighter than he should have been, far lighter. Beneath the wet fur and old fear, there was a frame built for strength, wasted down by neglect. When Caleb lifted him, the dog tensed as if expecting pain. None came. The shepherd's head turned toward Caleb's shoulder. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the dog pressed his forehead, barely, against Caleb's upper arm. It was not affection. Not yet. It was the smallest possible surrender to not being harmed. Caleb stood in the falling snow with the wounded German shepherd in his arms and felt something old and guarded inside him bow its head. Ruth cleared her throat, though her voice had lost its bite. "Vet?" "North Lantern," Caleb said. "At this hour?" "Miriam will answer." Ruth looked at the dog, then at Caleb. "You got cash left after that fool robbed you?" Caleb adjusted the shepherd's weight gently. "Enough. He played you." "No." Caleb looked down at the dog's torn ear, the rope burn hidden under ruined fur, the eyes still open, still watching. "He sold me what he never owned." Ruth did not answer. Caleb carried the dog to his pickup and laid an old wool blanket across the passenger seat. The shepherd allowed himself to be placed there, though his muscles stayed tight, ready for the world to change its mind. Before closing the door, Caleb paused. "What do you think?" he asked softly. "Hawthorne for now?" The dog blinked once. A tiny thing, almost nothing. But Caleb took it. He shut the door carefully, walked around to the driver's side, and climbed in. The cab smelled of cold leather, metal tools, and faint engine oil. Snow melted on Caleb's sleeves. Beside him, Hawthorne lay curled on the blanket, head low but eyes open. Caleb started the truck. The heater breathed lukewarm air through the vents, trying its best, like most old things in winter. Behind them, Ruth stood under the backlight of the juniper grill, one hand folded across her apron, watching until Caleb pulled away. The road into town was white and quiet. Caleb kept both hands on the wheel. He did not speak for the first mile. He had the receipt in his pocket, Warren's plate number in his memory, Ruth's camera footage behind him, and a wounded dog breathing beside him like a question the night had placed in his care. He had not gone looking for a fight. He had only come to fix a furnace. But sometimes, Caleb thought, the cold found its way into more than houses. Sometimes it settled into men, into systems, into the places where mercy should have lived. He glanced at the German shepherd. Hawthorne's eyes were still open, still watching. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "Let's get you warm." And the truck moved through the falling snow, carrying one tired man and one broken dog toward the first small mercy either of them had accepted in a long time. The North Lantern Veterinary Clinic sat at the quiet end of town, where Whitefish stopped pretending to be busy. By the time Caleb pulled into the small parking lot, the snow had thickened into soft, slanting lines. The clinic sign glowed warm yellow above the door, a painted lantern hanging over a trail of white paw prints. Most businesses on that street had already gone dark. North Lantern had not. Its windows still held light, the kind that made a winter night look less like a wall and more like something a person could cross. In the passenger seat, Hawthorne lay curled on the wool blanket. He had not slept, not once. Through the drive, he had kept his head low and his eyes open, following every passing headlight, every turn of the tires, every shadow thrown across the windshield. He did not whine. He did not search for comfort. He endured the moving truck as if it were one more test he had no choice but to pass. Caleb turned off the engine and sat for a moment. The heater ticked softly as it died. Melted snow slid down the glass. From inside the clinic came the muffled bark of a small dog, then silence. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "One more door." Hawthorne's ears shifted at the sound of his voice. Caleb got out first, came around, and opened the passenger door slowly. The dog looked at the gap, the falling snow, the yellow light beyond. When Caleb slid his arms beneath him again, Hawthorne tensed, but less than before. His body still expected pain. His mind seemed to be collecting evidence against it. The clinic door opened before Caleb reached it. "Doctor." Miriam Vale stood there in sage-green scrubs, beneath a thick gray cardigan, one hand holding the door, the other already reaching for the switch that opened the exam room lights. She was 44, with dark brown hair twisted into a low knot that had begun to loosen after a long day. Her face was calm, almost severe at first glance, but her eyes softened before anything else did. Those eyes went to the dog, then to Caleb's face. "What happened?" she asked. "Man in the juniper lot had him in a pickup bed," Caleb said. "Stick in one hand, rope in the other." Miriam did not waste words on outrage. That came later for people like her, after the animal was breathing evenly and the chart was filled out. She stepped back and let them in. Exam room 2. Inside, the clinic smelled of cedarwood cleaner, antiseptic, old towels, and animal fear carefully managed. A row of leashes hung near the counter. A ceramic mug full of pens sat beside a stack of vaccination cards. On the wall, a faded photo showed Miriam standing beside a mule deer fawn wrapped in a blanket, both of them looking equally suspicious of the camera. Caleb carried Hawthorne into the exam room and laid him on a folded fleece pad instead of the steel table. Miriam noticed that. She also noticed the way Caleb kept one hand near the dog's shoulder without pinning him. "Good," she murmured. "Floor first." Hawthorne's nostrils flared. His eyes moved from Caleb to Miriam, then to the door, then back to Caleb. Not panicked, mapping. Miriam crouched several feet away and removed her gloves slowly, finger by finger, making each movement visible. Her hands were narrow, quick-looking, marked by a few healing scratches across the knuckles. "I'm Miriam," she said, not in a childish voice, not sweetened for effect, just low and even. "I'm going to help if you'll let me." The dog did not move. Caleb stayed where he was. "I called because he needs more than food." "He needs a record," Miriam said, "and probably a great many things after that." She began without touching him at first. Weight by sight, breathing rate, posture, visible wounds. She asked Caleb what he had seen, and he answered plainly. Truck bed, rope, stick, Warren Pike, receipt, Ruth as witness, camera footage. At Warren's name, Miriam's hand paused over the clipboard. Only for a second, Caleb saw it. "You know him," he said. "I know of him." Miriam wrote something down, but the pressure of the pen had changed. "He brings dogs in sometimes, not often enough to be normal, often enough to bother me." "From where?" She looked at Hawthorne before answering. "A place called Bright Acre Renewal Home." The name sounded clean, too clean. Caleb said nothing. Miriam shifted closer to Hawthorne, still slow. She offered the back of her hand near his muzzle, not touching. Hawthorne leaned forward half an inch and drew in one short breath. Then he looked away, not in dismissal, but permission. Miriam began at the shoulder. Gentle pressure, parting fur, checking skin beneath. Hawthorne trembled, but he held. "Underweight," she said. "Dehydrated, but not severely enough for collapse. Old abrasions along the flank, newer bruising near the ribs, front left leg strained, maybe from impact or being pulled hard. I'll need x-rays if he lets me." When her hand moved toward his neck, everything changed. Hawthorne went still, not calmer, not relaxed, still in the way water stills before ice claims it. His eyes fixed on the far wall. His breathing disappeared into almost nothing. The muscles beneath Caleb's fingers hardened. Miriam stopped immediately. "All right," she said softly. "That's where the ghosts live." Caleb felt the words more than he heard them. He looked at the dog's neck, under the matted fur. Now that the clinic light was bright, the damage was clearer. A rough, pale groove circled part of the throat where hair had grown back unevenly. Near the back of the neck, the skin bore a few irregular healed marks, too deliberate to be simple scratches. Miriam's face tightened. "What?" Caleb asked. "I don't like that pattern." "Rope?" "Some of it." She angled the light without touching the skin. But these marks here behind the neck could be from someone trying to remove or damage an identifier. A microchip? Possibly. Or a tattoo, though chips are more common. She reached for a handheld scanner on the counter. We'll see. At the sight of the device, Hawthorne did not growl. He simply folded deeper into himself. His body remembered hands behind his head, pressure where he could not see, pain arriving from a blind place. Caleb moved without thinking, lowering himself beside the dog. Not in front of Miriam, not between them, beside. "Hawthorne," he said. The name still felt new, borrowed from burrs and thorn bushes and the shape of survival. But the dog's eyes shifted toward him. Easy. Hawthorne's ears moved. Caleb felt Miriam watching him, but he did not look up. He kept his voice low, the way he would have spoken near unstable ground, near a frightened animal, near a person one loud sound away from breaking. "Hold." The dog's trembling changed. It did not stop, but it organized itself. "Stay with me." Hawthorne's head lowered a fraction. His gaze fixed on Caleb now, waiting. The scanner passed over his shoulder blades. Nothing. Miriam moved it slowly along the neck, careful not to press too hard. Still nothing. A faint electronic hiss. No beep. She tried again, changing the angle, scanning behind the left shoulder, then the right. No signal. Miriam switched it off. "There may never have been one," she said. "Or it was damaged. Or removed badly." Caleb's jaw tightened. Hawthorne remained still until Caleb released a breath. "Okay," Caleb said. Only then did the dog shift. Miriam looked from Caleb to Hawthorne. Something in her expression had changed. Not surprise exactly. Recognition, perhaps. The kind that arrives unwillingly because the facts are starting to stand in a row. "He understood you," she said. "He understood tone." "No." Miriam's voice stayed quiet. "He understood more than tone." Caleb did not answer. She tested without making a show of it. She placed a small bowl of water near Hawthorne, then a few pieces of plain boiled chicken from a clinic container. Hawthorne's nostrils flared. Hunger moved through him visibly, a tremor beneath the ribs. But he did not lunge. He looked at Caleb. Miriam saw it. Caleb looked down at the bowl. "Go ahead." Hawthorne lowered his head and drank, slowly, painfully controlled. Afterward, he took the chicken piece by piece, as if even hunger had rules. Miriam stood very still. "I've seen starving dogs," she said. "They don't usually ask permission from a man they met an hour ago. He was trained." Yes. The little exam room seemed to shrink around that word. Trained meant someone had once invested time in him. Someone had taught him restraint, trust, sequence, purpose. Someone had once expected him to live long enough to be useful. And then, somewhere between that older life and this room, people had turned him into cargo. Miriam made notes on the chart. Caleb watched her handwriting. Clean. Efficient. Not the handwriting of someone guessing. "You said Bright Acre," he said. Miriam capped her pen. "They call themselves a renewal home. Rescue, rehabilitation, adoption placement. They have a website full of sunrise pictures and dogs wrapped in blankets. That bother you?" "Blankets don't bother me. Stories do, when they're too polished." She leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely. Her cardigan sleeve slid down over one wrist. "Warren Pike has brought dogs through here under their name. Different dogs, different conditions. Always thin, always frightened. Sometimes injured in ways that don't match the explanation. But each time, the paperwork is technically in order. Different transfer names, different partner groups. Enough ambiguity that one case looks like mismanagement, not a pattern. You reported it." "Twice." Her mouth tightened. "Both times, I had smoke and no fire." "That kind of thing teaches bad people to keep using smoke." Hawthorne lowered his head onto the fleece pad. His eyes remained open. Caleb reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded receipt Warren had signed. He placed it on the counter. Then he took out his phone and showed her the photos he had taken in the lot, the pickup, the rope, the dog's condition, the plate in the distance. "Ruth has camera footage," he said. Miriam looked at the images without flinching, but something in her grew colder. "This is better," she said. "Still not enough for everything, but better. Who do we call?" "I'll call Nolan." She picked up the clinic phone, not her cell. That detail told Caleb she wanted a record. The line rang 4 times before someone answered. "Nolan? It's Miriam Vale. I need to document a cruelty intake connected to Warren Pike." She listened. "Yes," again. A pause. "No, this one has a witness, possible footage, signed transfer, and visible injuries." Another pause. Miriam glanced at Caleb. "He's here with Caleb Wren." Whatever Sheriff Nolan Creed said on the other end made Miriam exhale through her nose, not quite a laugh. "I know. He doesn't usually collect trouble. That's why I'm calling." Caleb looked down at Hawthorne, who had closed one eye but not the other. Miriam stayed on the phone for several minutes, giving facts, not drama. When she hung up, her face held the tired expression of someone who had just convinced a door to open 1 inch. "He says not to confront Warren," she said. "No trespassing at Bright Acre, no threats. Keep the dog, keep the receipt, keep the medical records. Ruth should save the footage and make a copy. Nolan will take a statement tomorrow. And tonight? Tonight, you take him somewhere warm." Hawthorne's visible eye opened fully. Caleb glanced at him. "I don't have dog supplies." "I do." Miriam moved through the clinic with efficient grace, gathering what he needed: soft food, antibiotics, pain medication, antiseptic wash, bandage wrap, a harness instead of a collar, instructions written in careful lines. She added an old fleece blanket from a cabinet and a stainless bowl with a dent on one side. When Caleb reached for his wallet, she shook her head. "Pay me later." "I can pay now." "I said later." Caleb studied her. Miriam did not soften her voice. "I've learned not to argue with men who are trying to keep dignity in both hands. So don't argue with me while I do the same." For the first time that night, Caleb almost smiled for real. "All right." Getting Hawthorne back into the truck took time. Not because he fought, but because each movement needed to be asked of him rather than taken. Caleb lifted him carefully. Miriam held the door and watched the dog settle onto the blanket. Before Caleb got in, she said, "He may not sleep." "I figured. He may not eat normally." "I know. He may choose strange places to lie down." Caleb looked at her. "Doors," Miriam said. "Hallways. Between you and the outside. If he was trained and then hurt, he may still think his job is the only part of him no one can take." The sentence stayed with Caleb all the way home. His cabin stood near the edge of Whitefish Lake, where the houses thinned out and the pines came close enough to scratch at the roof in wind. It was a modest place, dark wood siding, a narrow porch, one yellow porch light, smoke from the chimney bending sideways in the cold. Inside, the rooms were orderly without being warm. A couch, a table, a few books, boots lined by the door, tools in their proper places. On one wall hung a single framed photograph of Caleb with 3 men in desert gear. He rarely looked at it and never moved it. He set up the fleece blanket near the stove, filled the bowl with water, placed food nearby, and opened the pain medication Miriam had labeled. Hawthorne stood in the center of the living room, swaying slightly. He looked at the blanket, then at the front door, then down the hallway toward Caleb's bedroom. Caleb said nothing. The dog limped past the warmest place in the house and lowered himself carefully between the front door and the hall, where he could see both. Caleb stood with the pill bottle in his hand. Miriam had been right. The job was still there. Ragged, wounded, half-starved, but there. Whatever had been done to Hawthorne had not erased the old commandment written into his bones. Watch the door, hold the line, do not fail the sleeping. Caleb turned off the kitchen light. The room softened into fire glow and shadow. He sat on the floor a few feet away, back against the couch, not close enough to crowd the dog. For a while, neither of them moved. Outside, snow whispered against the windows. The furnace, newly serviced by Caleb's own hands, hummed steadily beneath the floor. "You don't have to work tonight," Caleb said. Hawthorne's ears twitched, but he did not lift his head. Caleb looked toward the dark hallway, toward the photograph on the wall, toward the door the dog had chosen to guard. "You probably don't believe that yet." The dog breathed out slowly. It was not sleep, not peace, but it was a beginning. Caleb remained on the floor until the fire sank lower and the cabin settled around them. He had brought home a wounded dog because leaving him behind had been impossible. Now, in the low winter light of his own living room, he understood the harder truth. Hawthorne did not only need saving. Some battered, loyal part of him was still trying to save whoever stood close enough to be his responsibility. For the next several days, Whitefish shone as if winter had washed it clean by hand. Snow lay over the cabin roofs in soft white weight. Pine branches bent under frost and lifted again when the wind loosened them. The lake beyond Caleb's property had hardened into a broad sheet of silver blue, bright enough in the morning sun to make a man squint. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow ribbons. Even the road seemed quieter, as though the whole town had agreed to speak softly while the mountains slept. Inside Caleb Wren's cabin, warmth came in layers. The furnace hummed beneath the floor. The wood stove gave off a steady orange glow. A kettle sat on the back burner most mornings, not because Caleb drank much tea, but because the sound of water beginning to stir made the rooms feel less empty. Hawthorne did not trust any of it at first. He accepted food, but only after Caleb placed the bowl down and stepped back. He drank water in small, measured laps, pausing between each as if waiting for someone to punish him for needing it. He tolerated the antiseptic wash because Caleb spoke before touching him. He accepted the soft harness because it did not close around his throat. But he did not relax. Not the first night, not the second. By the third morning, Caleb understood that Hawthorne's body might be in the cabin, but some vigilant part of him still stood in a colder place. So Caleb stopped trying to convince him all at once. He built a routine instead. Morning. Food in small portions. Pain medicine hidden in a bite of soft turkey. Bandage check. Water warmed slightly so it would not shock an empty stomach. Midday. 5 slow minutes on the porch, no farther than the steps. Hawthorne limped beside him, head low, ears listening to every distant engine, every wing beat in the trees. Evening. Clean bedding near the stove, though Hawthorne still chose the angle between the front door and the hallway. Caleb did not coax him to the warmer spot. A man who had lived long enough with old wounds knew that safety ordered from the outside rarely felt like safety at all. The dog had to discover it, 1 inch at a time. On the 4th day, Hawthorne followed him into the mudroom while Caleb worked on a cracked copper line from an old boiler he had brought home to repair. The dog sat at a careful distance, watching the tools in Caleb's hands. "Not much of a show," Caleb said. Hawthorne blinked. Caleb tightened a fitting, checked the pressure gauge, then glanced at the dog. "You judging my work?" The German shepherd's left ear twitched the torn one, the little ragged edge catching the light. "Fair." The closest thing to laughter in the room was the kettle, beginning to murmur. Caleb had never been a man who talked to fill silence. In the teams, silence could mean focus. Afterward, silence had become habit, then preference, then wall. Yet with Hawthorne, words arrived differently. Not big ones, not confessions, just small pieces of sound laid down like stones across a creek. "Stay," Caleb said one afternoon when he opened the front door to bring in firewood. Hawthorne froze. Not because of the door, because of the word, Caleb noticed. He stepped out, took 2 pieces from the stack, came back in, and found Hawthorne exactly where he had left him. Not a paw moved, not even his head. Caleb set the wood down slowly. "All right," he said. "Come." Hawthorne crossed the room and stopped at Caleb's left knee. Not in front, not wandering. Left knee, tight position, clean. Caleb looked down at him. The dog looked up. Something cold walked very gently along Caleb's spine. Over the next day, he tested nothing obvious. He did not run drills. He did not turn the living room into a training yard. But he watched. He changed direction while walking across the cabin. Hawthorne adjusted smoothly. Caleb stopped near the kitchen threshold. Hawthorne stopped too, half a pace behind, a line to his left side. Caleb picked up the food bowl, and Hawthorne sat without being told. A pet could learn manners. This was not manners. This was a language remembered by the body. On the fifth afternoon, while searching for a spare brass fitting in the drawer beneath his workbench, Caleb found the whistle. It lay under a coil of wire and an old box of fuses, dull silver, dented at the rim. A thin cord, faded from green to gray, was still tied through its loop. Caleb picked it up and stood there longer than he meant to. The whistle belonged to another part of his life. Not frontline combat, not the pieces civilians like to turn into hard stories. It came from training days with search and rescue teams attached to disaster response exercises, collapsed structures, avalanche fields, night grids marked with flags. Caleb had never been a full handler, but he had learned enough to respect what trained dogs carried. Courage without speech, obedience without pride, loyalty too easily mistaken for ownership. He wiped the whistle with his thumb. Hawthorne lifted his head from the rug. Caleb had not blown it. He had only touched it. The dog's eyes fixed on the object in Caleb's hand. No fear this time. Recognition. Caleb stood very still. Outside, sunlight struck the frozen lake and filled the room with pale, reflected brightness. Dust moved in the air like tiny winter spirits. "No," Caleb murmured. "Not to the dog, not quite to himself. You know this kind of thing?" Hawthorne rose. Slowly, carefully. His injured leg still stiffened after rest, but his attention sharpened so completely that the tired, wounded dog vanished for one strange second, and something else stood in his place. A working animal. A disciplined animal. A dog with a buried history. Caleb lifted the whistle to his lips and gave one short note. Not loud, not sharp, just a small breath through metal. Hawthorne came at once. He did not rush blindly. He moved straight to Caleb's left side, sat and looked up, waiting. Caleb lowered the whistle. His first feeling was not wonder. It was grief, because training meant hands, time, repetition, praise, trust. It meant someone had once given this dog a job and a name and a place in the world. It meant the animal sitting before him had not been born into misery. He had been taken there. Caleb crouched slowly. Hawthorne held position. "What did they call you?" Caleb asked softly. The dog's amber eyes did not answer. A name was a small thing until it was stolen. Then it became a grave. That evening, Caleb called Miriam. She answered on the third ring. The clinic noise soft behind her metal bowls. A printer. One indignant cat somewhere voicing its legal objections. "How is he?" she asked. "Learning the house. That's not the same as relaxing." "No." Miriam gave a quiet hum of agreement. "Eating? Enough. Still waiting for permission. He may do that for a long time. He knows whistle recall." The clinic sound seemed to fall away. "What kind?" Short note. "Clean response. Left side sit." Miriam was silent for a moment. "That is not accidental. I know. I started looking at old rescue dog registries after you left. Not official law enforcement. Broader. Disaster response, private contracts, regional teams." Caleb stood near the window as he listened. Outside, Hawthorne had gone to the porch door and was watching a raven pick at something near the woodpile. "Anything?" Caleb asked. "Too much and not enough. There are hundreds of dogs. Some retired, some transferred. Some records are a mess because of subcontractors." Miriam paused. "I also spoke to Nolan. And? He's looking into Brightacre's filings. Publicly. They're beloved." "That's a problem." "It is. They bring in donations. They host adoption drives. The town council likes them. Their founder, Marla Voss, is very good at making suspicion look cruel." Caleb watched the raven lift off, black against white. "Miriam," he said, "Warren didn't act like a man afraid of being caught." "No," she said. Men like that are usually protected by someone cleaner." The sentence settled heavily between them. Caleb turned from the window. Hawthorne had moved without sound, and now stood 3 feet behind him, ears forward, as if the change in Caleb's breathing had been enough. "I'll keep him close," Caleb said. "Good. And Caleb?" "Yeah. If you test commands, don't push. We don't know what memories are tied to them. I'm not trying to use him." "I know." Her voice softened then, but only slightly. "That's why I said it." After the call, Caleb put the whistle in the drawer beside the stove instead of back in the workbench. Not hidden, not displayed, somewhere in between. That night, Hawthorne did something new. Caleb had just finished cleaning the wound near the dog's front leg. The work was slow. Hawthorne endured it with his head turned away, eyes fixed on the window. When Caleb wrapped the bandage and leaned back, he expected the dog to rise and return to the door. Instead, Hawthorne stayed, only for a minute. Then, too, he lowered his muzzle onto the edge of Caleb's boot. Not affection, exactly. Contact, a chosen point of trust. Caleb did not move. The old cabin breathed around them, timber creaking, stove murmuring, snow tapping faintly at the glass. He had known medals, orders, ceremonies, the firm grip of men who did not know what to say after surviving. None of them had felt as solemn as the weight of that wounded muzzle on his boot. "Well," Caleb said at last, very quietly, "that's something." Hawthorne closed one eye. The next evening brought Warren Pike to the cabin. Caleb heard the truck before he saw it. An uneven engine grinding up the lane, tires crunching over packed snow, then stopping too close to the porch. Hawthorne was on his feet before Caleb had risen from the chair. Not barking, positioning. Caleb looked through the front window and saw the red pickup idling under the porch light. Warren stepped out, wearing the same brown jacket, one hand jammed in his pocket, the other hanging loose. No stick this time. That almost made it worse. Caleb opened the door, but did not step outside. Cold air moved in. Hawthorne stood slightly ahead of his left leg. Warren glanced at the dog and smiled without warmth. "Looks better already." "What do you want?" Caleb asked. "Just passing by." "You took a wrong road." "Maybe." Warren's eyes shifted toward the dark lake, then back to Caleb. "Funny thing about dogs. Some of them don't stay bought." Caleb said nothing. Warren took one step toward the porch. Hawthorne's muscles tightened. His injured leg trembled, but he did not retreat. "You got a bleeding heart, Wren," Warren said. "That's your business. But some dogs come with trouble attached. Some dogs aren't supposed to be found again." There it was. Not a demand. A warning. Caleb felt his anger rise, but it came differently now. Not like the parking lot. Not clean enough for action. This was slower, mixed with calculation. Warren had not come for the dog. He had come to measure the fence. "You're on private property," Caleb said. Warren laughed under his breath. "You gonna call the sheriff?" "Yes." That wiped some of the smile away. Hawthorne's body had begun to shake. Caleb felt it through the small space between them. The dog's eyes were locked on Warren's right hand. Warren noticed too, so he lifted that hand. Not much, just a quick upward jerk, the ghost of a blow. Hawthorne flinched, then stepped forward. One step. Between Warren and Caleb, his head lowered, his shoulders squared. A low breath moved through him, not quite a growl. He did not lunge. He did not snap. He simply placed his damaged body where danger would have to pass through him first. Caleb looked down and understood. The dog was afraid, terribly afraid, but fear had not made him cruel. Whatever had been beaten into him, whatever had been taken from him, had not erased the deeper law. Protect, hold. Do not break unless commanded. Do not become the thing that hurt you. Caleb's hand lowered beside Hawthorne's shoulder, not touching, just there. "No," he said quietly. The dog stilled. Warren stared at them, and for the first time, something uncertain moved across his face. Caleb took out his phone and held it up. "Nolan Creed," he said into the speaker when the call connected. Warren Pike is on my property after dark, making threats about the dog. I'm recording now." Warren cursed. Caleb kept the phone steady. "Say it again," Caleb said. "The part about some dogs not supposed to be found." Warren backed away. "You think you're smart." "No," Caleb said. "I think you're leaving." The red pickup threw dirty snow as it reversed down the lane. Caleb remained in the doorway until the taillights disappeared. Only then did Hawthorne's legs give a small, exhausted tremor. Caleb closed the door and crouched beside him. "You held," he said. Hawthorne turned his head slightly, as if the word meant something old and serious. "You held," Caleb repeated, softer. The dog leaned once against Caleb's knee, briefly. Then he stepped back to his chosen place by the door. The next morning, Miriam called before sunrise. Her voice was rough with early coffee and little sleep. "I may have found someone," she said. Caleb stood in the kitchen with the phone against his ear, watching Hawthorne eat slowly from his bowl. "Someone who knows Bright Acre?" "No." "Someone who may know him." Caleb looked at the dog. Hawthorne paused mid-bite, feeling the attention. "Her name is Tessa Langford," Miriam said. "Former coordinator for Summit Response Dogs. Disaster search and rescue, avalanches, wildfires, collapsed structures. I sent her the photos you approved." Caleb's hand tightened around the phone. "And? She wants to speak with you directly." "When?" "She's calling today." Caleb watched Hawthorne lower his head back to the bowl. The morning light touched the torn edge of his left ear, then the pale ring of broken fur around his neck. "What did she say?" Caleb asked. Miriam was quiet for a long second. "She said she knew a German Shepherd with that scar pattern, and she said his name may not be Hawthorne." Outside, the lake lay bright and frozen beneath the winter sun. Inside, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Later that afternoon, the call came. The number was unfamiliar. Caleb answered from the living room, where Hawthorne lay near the door, eyes half open. "Mr. Wren?" a woman asked. Her voice was low, practical, and roughened by years spent speaking over wind. "Yes. This is Tessa Langford." Caleb straightened. On the other end, she took one breath that did not quite steady. "I was with Summit Response Dogs for 11 years. Miriam Vale sent me the photographs. The torn left ear, the old neck damage, the stance." Caleb looked at Hawthorne. The dog had lifted his head. Tessa continued, quieter now. "I can't confirm without seeing him in person, but I think the dog you have may be Bishop." The name moved through the room like a match struck in darkness. "Bishop." Hawthorne's ears rose. Caleb did not speak. "He was a disaster response shepherd," Tessa said. "Avalanche and collapse search. Calm under pressure. Strong left side obedience. We lost him during a subcontracted transport after a regional training transfer. The paperwork went bad, then worse. By the time we traced it, the company had folded, and the dog was gone." Her voice caught, just once. "We thought he was dead." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. In the silence, Hawthorne stood, not quickly, not dramatically. He simply rose and stepped closer to Caleb, as if the room had changed shape around a word he almost remembered. "Bishop," Caleb said softly. The dog looked at him. There was no miracle in it, no sudden healing, no wagging tail, no leap of recognition that would make a crowd weep, just a wounded animal standing very still while an old name returned from the snow. But Caleb felt the weight of it. Hawthorne had not only been beaten, he had been misplaced, renamed, erased, and sold like scrap by men who never owned the first honest thing about him. Tessa's voice came through the phone again. "Mr. Wren? I'm here. If it's him, he deserves his name back." Caleb looked down at the German Shepherd standing by his knee. The dog who had guarded his door obeyed a whistle, faced the man who hurt him, and still chosen restraint. "He'll get more than that," Caleb said. After the call ended, Caleb sat beside the stove with the phone still in his hand. Hawthorne Bishop. Perhaps Bishop lowered himself near the door again. But this time, before settling, he looked back at Caleb. not waiting for a command, waiting, perhaps, for the next piece of himself to be found. Caleb put the old whistle on the table between them. Outside, snow began again, bright in the late afternoon sun, falling softly over Whitefish as if the sky were trying to bury every old wrong. Inside, a name had been dug up instead, and Caleb understood that the dog beside his door was not only recovering from wounds, he was returning from disappearance. The appointment was supposed to be simple. A vaccination, a weight check, a look at the front leg, and maybe, if Hawthorne allowed it, a closer examination of the scarred skin along his neck. Caleb had written the time on the back of an old invoice and stuck it beneath a magnet on the refrigerator, as if putting the appointment among ordinary things might make the day ordinary too. It did not. The morning came bright and cold. Sunlight struck the snow so sharply that the whole town of Whitefish looked cut from glass. Storefront windows shone. Icicles hung from roof lines like cathedral pipes. A delivery man rolled bread crates along the sidewalk while steam rose from the bakery vents. Hawthorne rode in the passenger seat, harness clipped to the safety tether Miriam had insisted on. He was stronger than he had been a week before, though strength still arrived in fragments. The ribs showed less sharply beneath his black and tan coat. The wound on his leg had begun to close. His left ear, torn along the edge, stood crooked but proud. Caleb kept the old whistle in his jacket pocket, not because he planned to use it, but because some objects carried a strange kind of promise. The whistle did not belong to Hawthorne exactly, not yet, but it belonged to the idea that he had once been more than someone's property. As they turned onto Lantern Street, Hawthorne lifted his head. Caleb noticed. The dog's ears angled forward. His breathing changed. Not fear, not quite alert, but something between recognition and warning. "Easy," Caleb said. Hawthorne did not look at him, his eyes fixed on the clinic. Then Caleb saw the red pickup. It sat crooked outside North Lantern Veterinary Clinic, engine idling, exhaust spilling white into the cold. In the truck bed were 3 wire cages strapped under a patched tarp. The tarp had been pulled partly back, and inside the shadows, something moved. Caleb parked across the street. He did not get out immediately. Through the clinic window, he could see Warren Pike at the front counter. Even through the glass, the man's body language was loud. One hand slapping paper onto the counter, shoulders squared, chin thrust forward. Miriam stood on the other side, still in her sage-green scrubs, her dark hair pinned low, face calm in the dangerous way of a person refusing to be pushed backward. Caleb reached into the glove compartment and took out his phone. He photographed Warren's truck, the plate, the cages, the tarp. The timestamp would matter later. Hawthorne made a low sound in his chest, not a growl, a memory tightening. "I know," Caleb said. "We go slow." He opened the passenger door and let Hawthorne step down by himself. The dog landed carefully, favoring the front leg, but remained steady. The moment his paws touched snow, his gaze went to the truck bed. One of the cages shifted. A gray muzzle appeared between the bars. Old Labrador. Yellow-white around the face. A raw scrape marked the side of the muzzle, though the wound was not fresh enough to bleed. The dog blinked against the light, then withdrew. Behind another cage, Caleb saw a Belgian Malinois female, her coat darkened by grime, her eyes dull with exhaustion. The third cage held another German shepherd, younger than Hawthorne, standing with the unsteady sway of a body that had not eaten enough and had learned not to ask twice. Caleb felt Hawthorne stiffen beside him. This time, the feeling in Caleb was not the clean blade of anger from the juniper lot. It was heavier, wider, like seeing one broken fence post and realizing the whole field had been left open. He guided Hawthorne toward the clinic door. Inside, Warren's voice cracked across the room. "She doesn't need a spa day, Doc. She needs a signature." Miriam's reply was even. "None of those dogs are medically cleared for long-distance transport. They're going to a partner home. They are dehydrated, underweight, and one appears unstable on its feet." "Appears?" Warren barked a laugh. Since when do you diagnose through a window? Since you refuse to let me examine them properly? Warren leaned closer over the counter. You know what Brightacre pays this clinic in referrals? The bell above the door rang as Caleb entered. The room went still. Warren turned, and for a second, the mask slipped, not fear. Irritation sharpened by recognition. Well, he said, look who's playing rescue hero again. Caleb closed the door behind him. Hawthorne stood at his left side, head level, eyes on Warren's hands. Miriam glanced briefly at Caleb, then at the dog. Her face did not change, but something in her shoulders eased by a fraction. I'm here for Hawthorne's appointment, Caleb said. Warren snorted. Hawthorne. That what you're calling him? Caleb did not answer the bait. Miriam placed one hand flat on the papers Warren had brought. These forms request medical clearance for interstate transport. I am declining to sign. You don't have the authority to decline. I have the license you came here to use. That gives me the authority. Warren's face darkened. He stepped closer to the counter. Caleb moved once. No hurry, no threat. Just a single step that put him between Warren and Miriam's side of the counter. The room was too small for theatrics. There were paw print posters on the wall, a rack of flea medication near the register, a ceramic jar of dog treats shaped like bones. It would have looked almost funny if the air had not gone so tight. Warren looked up at him. Move. No. Hawthorne trembled. Caleb felt it through the leash. Warren saw it too, and his mouth twisted. Still remembers me. Miriam's eyes flashed then, quick and sharp. Caleb's voice stayed low. That is not something to be proud of. For one breath, Warren seemed ready to turn the clinic into a fight. Then a phone rang in the back room, bright and ordinary, cutting through the tension like a teaspoon dropped in a church. Miriam did not look away from Warren. Take your dogs home, she said, or leave them here for full examination and documentation. Warren gathered the papers off the counter with a violent swipe. You'll regret making this difficult. I already regret not making it difficult sooner. That landed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but it struck something. Warren shoved the door open and stormed outside. The bell jangled after him. Through the window, Caleb watched him throw the papers into the cab, yank the tarp over the cages, and climb into the truck. The old Labrador's muzzle appeared again before the tarp fell. Then the red pickup lurched away from the curb and disappeared down the bright street. For a moment, no one spoke. The clinic smelled of disinfectant and winter air. Miriam leaned both hands on the counter and lowered her head. Are you all right? Caleb asked. She gave a small laugh without humor. I am furious, which is close enough. Hawthorne's trembling had slowed. He looked toward the door where Warren had gone, then back at Miriam. That surprised Caleb. The dog stepped once toward her, not close, just enough to change the shape of the room. Miriam noticed and went still. She did not reach down. She did not soften into sentiment. She simply lowered her hand beside her leg, palm relaxed. Hawthorne sniffed the air near her fingers. Then he sat. It was not obedience to her. It was recognition of someone who had refused to sign a lie. Miriam swallowed once. Well, she said quietly, thank you. The appointment no longer felt routine, but Miriam insisted on finishing what they had come for. Hawthorne allowed the vaccination with only a flinch. He permitted Miriam to check the healing leg and weigh him. He had gained 4 pounds. 4 pounds, Caleb repeated. Miriam wrote it on the chart. That is not a small victory. Hawthorne stared at the treat jar, but did not approach it. Caleb glanced down. Go ahead. The dog accepted one treat from Miriam's open palm. Carefully, like a treaty. Afterward, Miriam spread Warren's unsigned forms beside Hawthorne's medical chart. The paperwork was too neat. Each dog listed under a different temporary transfer code. Each destination described as a partner rehabilitation placement. Each line clean enough to hide the dirt underneath. Caleb stood beside her in the back office while Hawthorne lay near the door, watching the hallway. "This is the third transport request I've seen in 2 months," Miriam said. "Maybe the fourth. Different names, same pattern." She pulled an old file from a cabinet and placed it on the desk. Then another. Then a third. Caleb looked at the labels. Dates, intake notes, weight concerns, vague explanations. Warren's name did not appear on all of them, but Bright Acre hovered near the edges like smoke. "They never bring enough for a case by itself," Miriam said. "One thin dog can be explained. One bad transport can be blamed on a previous owner. One missing follow-up can be an administrative error. But lined up, it becomes a road," Caleb said. Miriam nodded. A sadness moved through her face then, not soft, not helpless, but old. "I should have lined them up earlier." Caleb looked at the files. "You had pieces. I had enough to be uneasy. That is not the same as enough to make it stick." She turned toward him. "You sound like Nolan. He's not wrong." "No," she said. "He is not. That does not make it easier to sleep." Caleb had no answer to that. Some truths were like injured animals. They did not become less painful because you named them correctly. Miriam called Sheriff Nolan Creed before noon. This time, she put the call on speaker. Nolan's voice came through slow and gravelly, the voice of a man who had started the day with bad coffee and worse paperwork. "You got photos?" he asked. "Caleb has the truck and cages," Miriam said. "I have the forms and prior files." "Dog still with Pike?" "Yes." A pause. Caleb could hear Nolan thinking. He could almost see the older man standing in his office, rubbing the knee that bothered him in cold weather, staring at a town map with too many friendly names pinned to uncomfortable places. "I'll come by," Nolan said. "Don't send anything by email yet. Print copies, keep originals." "I'm calling the State Animal Welfare Office." Miriam closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. This is going to make people mad." "It should." Nolan gave a tired grunt. "That too." He arrived an hour later in a tan sheriff's jacket, dusted with snow, silver mustache neat, notebook already in hand. He looked older in the clinic light, not weak, but burdened by the knowledge that small towns rarely forgave those who disturbed their favorite illusions. He took Miriam's statement, then Caleb's. He photographed the unsigned forms, Hawthorne's injuries, and the chart with Miriam's permission. When Caleb showed him the pictures of the truck cages, Nolan stared longer than he needed to. "That Malinois," he said quietly. "I saw her on a Bright Acre flyer last month. They said she was recovering beautifully." Miriam's mouth tightened. "She was in a cage under a tarp this morning." Nolan wrote something down. It was not a dramatic moment. No thunder, no music. Just ink moving across paper. But Caleb felt the ground shift, because systems did not fall when good men got angry. They fell when someone finally wrote the truth in a place it could not be politely ignored. By late afternoon, the clinic had closed to regular appointments. Miriam locked the front door but left the lights on. Snow had begun again, soft and steady, blurring the street outside. Hawthorne slept for nearly 20 minutes near the exam room threshold. Caleb watched him, amazed by that small surrender, then looked away so it would not feel witnessed. At 5:42 p.m., the clinic phone rang. Miriam answered with her usual professional calm. "North Lantern Veterinary Clinic." Caleb saw the change before he heard a word from the other end. Miriam's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in recognition of fear. "Slow down," she said. "Who is this?" A thin female voice came through, trembling enough that even Caleb could hear it from across the room. "My name is Joelle Mercer. I volunteer at Bright Acre. Please don't hang up." Miriam straightened. Caleb rose from the chair. Hawthorne opened his eyes. Joelle spoke quickly, as if courage had a short fuse. She said she had believed in Bright Acre. She had filmed adoption videos, cleaned the front kennels, written captions about second chances. She had cried on camera holding dogs she thought they had saved. Then she found the back schedule, not the public calendar. The other one, transport dates, photo days, feeding restrictions before donor shoots. Notes about which dogs looked most urgent. A storage shed marked off limits, names changed to numbers, numbers crossed out. "I copied some of it," Joelle said. Her voice cracked. "I didn't know at first. I swear I didn't understand what I was helping them do." Miriam's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "Where are you now?" "In my car, 2 blocks away. I saw Warren leave your clinic earlier. He was angry." "I think they're moving dogs tonight or tomorrow." Caleb looked at Nolan. The sheriff's expression hardened. Miriam said, "Come to the clinic. Park in back. Don't call anyone else." Joelle arrived 15 minutes later through the rear entrance, shoulders hunched inside a brown puffer jacket, dark blonde hair tucked messily beneath a knit cap. She was 36, but looked younger in the exhausted way of someone who had not slept honestly in days. Her hands shook around a small camera bag. She froze when she saw Hawthorne. The dog had stood at the sound of the door. Now he watched her without moving. Joelle's face collapsed. "Oh, God," she whispered. Miriam moved closer. "You know him?" Joelle pressed one hand to her mouth. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "They told us he died." Caleb felt every muscle in his body still. Joelle shook her head, as if trying to deny her own memory. Not Hawthorne. They didn't call him that. In the back files, he was just K-17 for a while. But there was another name under it, crossed out. She looked at the German Shepherd, at the torn ear, the scarred neck, the amber eyes that had survived too many human decisions. It said Bishop. The clinic seemed to grow quiet around the name. Hawthorne did not leap forward. He did not transform. He simply stood there, breathing carefully, while the life stolen from him became a little less hidden. Caleb looked from the dog to Joelle's shaking hands, then to the camera bag where evidence waited like a match in dry grass. Outside, snow kept falling over Whitefish, clean and bright, covering roofs, sidewalks, windshields, and lies. Inside North Lantern, no one moved for a long moment. Then Sheriff Nolan Creed opened his notebook again. "All right," he said. "Start at the beginning." Brightacre Renewal Home looked innocent from the road. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Not the fence, not the cameras tucked discreetly beneath the eaves, not the long service drive curving behind the barn. Innocence came first. A white wooden sign, hand-painted with a golden sun and a trail of paw prints, stood beside the entrance. Someone had tied fresh evergreen around the posts. A red ribbon fluttered in the clean winter wind. Beyond it, the old farm spread across a field of snow like a postcard made for generous hearts. The front kennels were painted cream and pale blue. Heated water bowls gleamed beneath small awnings. A row of lanterns hung from hooks along a walkway swept clean of snow. There were blankets folded in baskets near the visitor gate, each one embroidered with the words, "Second chances begin here." If Caleb had driven past without knowing better, he might have believed the place was kind. That was the ugliness of it. Cruelty did not always announce itself with rust and chains. Sometimes it wore a clean sweater. Sometimes it swept the walkway before guests arrived. He sat in his truck across from the property, far enough down the road not to look like a man waiting for trouble. Hawthorne lay in the passenger seat, harness clipped, head low but eyes open. Miriam sat in the back seat with a folder on her lap. Sheriff Nolan Creed had not permitted them to approach the gate, and for once, Caleb had not argued. This was observation, nothing more. No trespassing, no heroics, no old instincts pretending to be justice. Joelle Mercer had drawn the map the night before on a yellow legal pad in Miriam's office. Her hand shook so badly at first that Nolan had taken the pen from her and told her to breathe before the paper started looking like an earthquake report. The front buildings were for visitors. The left barn held supplies and donation inventory. The bright kennel row near the driveway was for tours. The rear shed, hidden behind the old hay barn and a line of spruce trees, was where the dogs, not ready for public presentation, were kept. Joelle had said that phrase with her eyes lowered, not ready for public presentation, as if pain were a costume needing better lighting. Now Caleb watched the actual place behind her words, a place of careful paint and careful lies. A woman in a cream coat crossed the front walkway, carrying a clipboard. Even from a distance, Caleb could see that she moved as though the ground had been arranged for her approval. The coat was expensive without looking flashy. Her honey-blonde hair brushed her shoulders in soft waves. She paused near one of the visitor kennels and crouched to adjust a blanket around a small terrier. For anyone watching from the road, it was a tender image. Miriam leaned slightly forward. Marla Voss. Caleb kept his eyes on the woman. She always looked like that? Like she's being photographed by God? Miriam asked. Caleb glanced back. Miriam's mouth barely moved. It was not quite a smile. That would be one way to put it, he said. She founded Brightacre 8 years ago, Miriam said. Back then, people say it was different. Smaller, messier, probably real. People like a redemption story. They like donating to one even more. Hawthorne's ears lifted. Caleb felt the change before he saw the cause. A side door had opened near the back of the barn. Warren Pike stepped out, carrying a plastic bucket in one hand. He was too far away for Caleb to see his expression, but his walk had the same heavy irritation, as if gravity itself were an insult. Hawthorne's breathing shortened. Caleb did not touch him. Easy, he said, barely above a whisper. The German Shepherd remained still, but his body had gone tight beneath the thin blanket Caleb kept over him in the truck. His gaze moved past Warren, past the barn, toward the line of spruce trees behind it. Not the front kennels, not Marla, the rear, Miriam noticed. He knows that direction. Caleb looked at the hidden line of trees. Or he smells something from it. We shouldn't use him for that. No. The answer came too quickly, too firmly, because Caleb had already felt the temptation and hated it. Hawthorne had suffered enough from people turning his ability into usefulness. Caleb would not put him back on a leash and call it truth. A vehicle approached behind them. Nolan's sheriff SUV rolled past without stopping, then turned down a side road toward town as planned. Officially, he was not there to raid anything. Not yet. He had collected Joelle's statement, Miriam's files, Caleb's photos, Ruth's footage, and the clinic forms Warren had tried to force through. He was pushing the State Animal Welfare Office for a formal inspection order, but Brightacre's public face was making everything slower. Slowness was law. Slowness also gave liars time to clean rooms. Caleb watched Marla stand and speak to a gray-haired couple at the visitor gate. Her hands moved gently as she talked. One hand went to her chest when the woman in the couple touched her arm. Marla bowed her head just enough to look humble without losing control of the scene. Miriam shut the folder on her lap. I hate how good she is at it, she said. Caleb looked back at her. At what? Sounding like mercy. For a few moments, no one spoke. The wind moved snow in thin sheets across the road. Somewhere in Brightacre's front yard, a dog barked once, high and bright. The sound floated through the clean air, then vanished. Hawthorne did not react to that bark. He kept watching the rear shed. That afternoon, Tessa Langford arrived in Whitefish with a red rescue jacket, a weatherproof folder, and the face of someone who had rehearsed not hoping too much. Caleb met her at North Lantern after closing. Miriam had locked the front door and lowered the blinds. Joelle sat in the corner of the waiting room with both hands around a paper cup of coffee she had not drunk. Sheriff Nolan stood near the counter, his notebook ready but closed for once. Tessa came in through the side entrance, carrying Winter with her. She was 48, tall and straight-backed, with black hair streaked silver and tied low at the nape of her neck. A small scar marked her chin. The patch on her sleeve read Summit Response Dogs, though the stitching had faded from years of weather. She did not offer a wide smile. People who had lost dogs in the line of service rarely wasted their faces on politeness when the truth might hurt. Caleb stood with Hawthorne beside him. The dog watched Tessa come in. Tessa stopped 3 steps inside the room. All her practical discipline faltered for half a second. "Oh," she said. Not loud, not dramatic, Just one small sound, as if something had struck the breath out of her. Hawthorne's ears lifted. Tessa crouched slowly, one knee touching the clinic floor. She did not reach for him. Instead, she opened the folder and took out a photograph. The picture showed a healthier German Shepherd standing on a snowy training field beside a line of rescue workers. His coat was full and bright. His ears were both whole then, though the left one had a slight tilt. Around his neck was a working harness with a summit patch. His eyes were unmistakable, amber dark, focused, alive with purpose. Caleb looked from the photograph to the dog beside him. Hawthorne stared at the picture. The room seemed to narrow around that silent comparison. Tessa's fingers rested on the edge of the photo. His name was Bishop. The word did not produce a miracle. Caleb had not expected one, but Hawthorne stepped forward once, slowly, as if drawn not by command, but by a shape of sound he had once lived inside. Tessa's eyes filled, though no tears fell. He worked avalanche grids, she said, collapsed barn searches, 2 wildfire recovery assists, calm under noise, strong left-side discipline, refused food on task until released. He was... She stopped, and for the first time her voice lost its clean edge. He was one of the best dogs we had. Joelle looked down at her coffee. Miriam's arms folded across her chest, not defensively, but as if holding herself still. "What happened?" Nolan asked. Tessa placed a second document on the counter. Regional transfer. Bishop and 2 other dogs were being moved between training sites through a subcontracted transport company. There was a snow delay, then a reroute, then paperwork that stopped making sense. 1 dog was recovered in Idaho. Another was placed correctly. Bishop vanished. Vanished how? Caleb asked. Wrong crate number, wrong destination signature. A receiving facility that claimed he never arrived. By the time we pushed hard enough, the transport company had declared bankruptcy. Records were incomplete. Names had been altered. We filed reports, but no one could prove where he went. Joelle made a small sound. Everyone looked at her. She reached into her camera bag and pulled out a folded printout. I found this in Bright Acres' back office. Her voice was thin, but steady enough. It's an old intake scan. K-17, male German Shepherd, no owner listed. Notes say unclaimed transfer, no viable chip. But underneath, she unfolded the paper. A name had been typed, then crossed out with a thick black line, Bishop. Caleb felt the anger return, but not as heat. It became a cold architecture inside him, beam by beam, something that could stand. Tessa took the page with both hands. For a moment, she looked older than she had when she entered. They knew, she said. No one answered, because the paper answered enough. Hawthorne Bishop stood between Caleb and Tessa, looking from one face to another. He did not understand documents. He did not know bankruptcy, transfer fraud, donor optics, or nonprofit language polished until it could cut. But he knew the room had changed around him. He knew the humans had found a piece of something buried. Caleb lowered his hand beside his leg. The dog leaned his shoulder lightly against it. This time, Caleb did touch him, just 2 fingers along the shoulder. Not ownership. Witness. Nolan opened his notebook. All right, he said. Now we have identity, missing dog records, an altered intake document, cruelty documentation, and a current witness from inside Bright Acre. Is it enough? Miriam asked. It's enough to ask louder, Nolan said. Maybe not enough to kick doors tonight. Joelle's face tightened. If they know, they'll move the dogs. Nolan looked at her. Do they know what you copied? I don't think so. Do they know you're here? Joelle swallowed. No. Then you stay unreachable for now. Miriam shook her head. She can stay in the clinic apartment upstairs. Joelle looked startled. I don't want to bring trouble. You already brought the truth, Miriam said. Trouble was here before you. That quiet sentence settled over Joelle like a blanket she did not yet know how to accept. The next problem arrived in the form of a poster. It was taped to the inside of North Lantern's front window by one of Miriam's assistants before anyone thought to remove it. Bright Acres' annual Winter Mercy Gala. The event was scheduled for the following evening at Whitefish Town Hall. The poster showed Marla Voss kneeling beside a once thin hound, now wearing a red bow, the background glowing with candles and pine branches. Below the photograph, in elegant script, it read, "Help us bring the forgotten home." Caleb stood before the poster after everyone else had noticed. The word forgotten had been printed in gold. He thought of Bishop's name crossed out in black. Miriam came to stand beside him. "They'll raise half their winter budget tomorrow. With dogs from the back shed? Or photos of them?" she said. "Maybe both." Nolan rubbed a hand over his mustache. "The inspection request may not process before then." Tessa looked at the poster, then at Bishop. "She'll tell stories." "She's good at that," Miriam said. "Then someone needs to bring facts into the room." Caleb turned. "No." Tessa met his eyes. He did not need her to explain. He already understood what she was asking before she said it. "No?" Caleb repeated. "He's not evidence on a leash." Bishop looked up at him. Tessa's voice stayed low. "I'm not asking you to parade him. That's exactly what the world does to dogs like him when it runs out of shame." Tessa did not flinch. If anything, respect moved briefly across her face. "I lost him once," she said. "Not because I didn't care. Because paperwork swallowed him. Because systems traded him by number until his name disappeared. If we walk into that room with documents only, Marla will make it sound like a misunderstanding. If people see him alive, named, standing beside the man who got him out, they may finally understand that a crossed-out name belonged to someone." Caleb's jaw tightened. Miriam said nothing. Nolan said nothing. Even Joelle held still. The decision should have been simple. Protect the dog, keep him home, let the law do its slow work. But law had not protected Bishop when his crate number changed. Good intentions had not protected the other dogs behind the spruce trees. And hiding him away, even out of love, felt suddenly too close to the way he had disappeared in the first place. Caleb looked down. Bishop stood beside him, weight balanced despite the injured leg. Torn ear angled forward, eyes alert. Not a prop. Not a symbol waiting to be used. A living creature who had endured being renamed by cruelty and now stood on the edge of being called true. Caleb crouched. "You don't owe anyone a performance," he said to the dog. Bishop's ears shifted at his voice. Caleb touched the harness lightly. "But I can stand there with you, if you choose to stand." It was foolish, maybe, speaking of choice to a dog who could not understand the politics of a town hall. But Caleb had learned that respect did not always require perfect comprehension. Sometimes it began with refusing to drag. Bishop leaned forward and pressed his muzzle once against Caleb's wrist. Tessa looked away. Miriam blinked hard and pretended to check the lock on the cabinet. Nolan cleared his throat. "If you attend, you do not accuse without the state office present. Miriam can raise a records discrepancy. Tessa can confirm identity. Joelle does not speak publicly unless necessary. I'll have deputies nearby." "And Brightacre?" Caleb asked. "I'll push for a limited inspection to move the same evening. If the judge signs in time, we don't wait for the gala to end." Joelle closed her eyes. For the first time since she had entered their lives, relief and fear seemed to occupy her face in equal measure. Outside, evening settled over Whitefish. The snow beyond the clinic windows glowed blue under the streetlights. Cars passed slowly, their tires whispering over slush. Somewhere across town, Brightacre's front kennels were likely being swept, candles packed, donation envelopes counted. Inside North Lantern, the truth lay in pieces across Miriam's counter. Photographs, medical charts, witness notes, transport forms, an old Summit response dogs file, and one crossed-out name that refused to stay buried. Caleb folded Bishop's photograph carefully and handed it back to Tessa. "He keeps Hawthorne," he said. Tessa looked at him, surprised. "For now," Caleb continued. "That's the name he got when he came out of that truck. Bishop is his too, but he doesn't lose one life to get another back. Tessa nodded slowly. That seems fair. Bishop lowered himself beside Caleb's boot and rested his chin on the floor, eyes still open. Not asleep, not yet, but present. Caleb looked at the poster in the window again, at Marla's soft smile, and the golden word forgotten. Tomorrow the town would gather beneath warm lights to celebrate a mercy that had been arranged for display. Caleb had no interest in speeches. He had even less interest in being looked at. But he knew what it was to stand beside someone when the room preferred a lie. He had done many difficult things in his life. This one, somehow, felt different. Not because it required force, because it required restraint. He looked down at Hawthorne, at Bishop, at the wounded dog who was both names now. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "We'll go." Whitefish Town Hall had never looked warmer. Golden bulbs hung from the rafters in loose strands, glowing over pine garlands, red ribbons, and long tables covered in white cloth. Someone had arranged gingerbread cookies beside donation envelopes. A coffee urn steamed near the back wall. Along both sides of the room, framed photographs showed dogs wrapped in blankets, dogs peering from kennels, dogs standing beside smiling volunteers beneath captions written in gentle, polished words. Saved. Restored. Home at last. The words looked harmless. That was what made them hard to face. People filled the hall in winter coats and wool scarves, cheeks flushed from the cold. They greeted one another softly, laughing near the refreshment table, touching the photographs with sad little smiles. Most of them had donated to Brightacre before. Some had adopted from them. Some had shared their videos online. Some had written checks because the stories made them cry, and crying felt close enough to helping. Caleb stood near the left wall, away from the brightest lights. Hawthorne stood beside him in a soft brown harness, the leash held loose in Caleb's hand. Not tight, never tight. The German shepherd's coat had gained some fullness since the night in the truck bed, but the scars still spoke plainly. The torn edge of the left ear, the uneven fur at the neck, the careful placement of his injured leg. Caleb had brushed him before they came, not to make him presentable, to make him comfortable. Miriam stood a few feet away in a dark blue blazer over a pale gray sweater, a folder tucked beneath one arm. Tessa Langford waited beside her, red rescue jacket zipped halfway, Summit response dog's patch visible on her sleeve. Joelle Mercer stayed farther back near the side hallway, hood down, camera bag against her hip, looking like someone standing at the edge of her own confession. Sheriff Nolan Creed moved through the room in his tan winter jacket, greeting people as if nothing unusual were about to happen. His face was calm, too calm. Caleb knew that kind of calm. It was the lid held over boiling water. At the front of the hall, Marla Voss smiled beneath the golden lights. She wore a cream sweater, a pale scarf, and a small silver pin shaped like a paw print. Her honey-blonde hair fell softly around her face. She looked exactly like the woman on the posters, kind, composed, touched by the suffering of animals, but not broken by it. The kind of woman a town wanted to believe in because believing in her made the town feel better about itself. Warren Pike stood near the back doors, arms folded, jaw tight. He looked wrong in the room, too rough for the candles, too restless for the music. His eyes found Caleb once, then dropped to Hawthorne, and something bitter moved across his face. Hawthorne noticed. His body tightened. Caleb lowered his hand near the dog's shoulder without touching. Easy. Hawthorne did not look away from Warren, but he held. At 7:05, Marla stepped to the microphone. The room quieted with almost grateful obedience. "Friends," she began, voice soft and carrying, "thank you for coming out on a cold night to stand with the forgotten." A murmur moved through the crowd. Warm, sympathetic. Caleb looked at the photographs along the wall. The forgotten. The word had become a lantern in Marla's hand. She knew exactly how to hold it. She spoke of abandoned animals, of winter cruelty, of second chances, of volunteers who gave their time, and donors who became part of every rescue. She paused in the right places. lowered her voice at the right names, smiled as if humility itself had chosen her as its local representative. Miriam did not move, but Caleb saw her grip tighten on the folder. On the far side of the room, Nolan checked his phone. No change in his expression. That meant something was happening elsewhere. At Bright Acre, if the timing held, 2 deputies and a state animal welfare inspector were approaching the rear access road with Joelle's map and the inspection authorization Nolan had pushed through that afternoon. Not a raid, not yet. A limited welfare check tied to transport concerns and veterinary refusal records. It was slow, it was lawful, it was the only way to keep the truth from being thrown out with the snow. Marla clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up. The first photograph showed a hound curled beneath a filthy blanket. The second showed the same hound months later, wearing a red bow and standing in front of Bright Acre's painted fence. People sighed. Someone whispered, "Bless them." Another slide, another dog, another transformation, before and after, misery and miracle, pain and branding. Caleb felt Hawthorne shift beside him. The next slide appeared. A German shepherd crouched in the corner of a kennel, head low, ribs visible beneath a dull black and tan coat. The image had been taken through fencing. The dog's left ear was torn. The neck fur looked uneven. The eyes, even in poor lighting, were unmistakable. Caleb stopped breathing for half a second. Miriam's face went still. Tessa stepped forward once, then stopped herself. On the screen, beneath the photograph, elegant white lettering read, K-17, rescued too late, lost to complications before placement. A sound went through the room. Not loud, not yet. Just the first crack in a frozen lake. Caleb felt the leash slacken as Hawthorne raised his head toward the image. The dog did not understand the sentence. He did not know that he had just been declared dead in a room full of donors. But something about the silence, the human attention, the old photograph of his own suffering, something reached him. Marla began speaking again, smoothly. "Some stories do not end as we pray they will," she said, placing one hand over her chest. "But even when we cannot save every life, we honor them by saving the next." "Miriam," Caleb said quietly. "I know." She walked forward. Not quickly, not angrily. She moved with the calm of a woman stepping into surgery after the wound had finally been opened. "Marla," Miriam said. The microphone caught only part of it, but the room turned. Marla's smile did not disappear. It adjusted. "Dr. Vale, I didn't realize you planned to speak tonight." "I did not plan to." Miriam looked at the screen. "But that dog is not dead." The room went completely quiet. Marla's smile held, but a little less easily. "I'm sorry?" "That German shepherd," Miriam said. K-17. The one your slide says died before placement. He is alive. Whispers rose immediately. Miriam turned slightly and looked toward Caleb. No showmanship, no command, just truth asking to stand. Caleb stepped forward with Hawthorne beside him. The dog moved carefully, one controlled step after another, until the golden light fell across his scarred neck and torn ear. The room seemed to inhale all at once. An older woman near the front covered her mouth. Someone near the coffee table whispered, "That's the same dog." Marla looked at Hawthorne. For the first time that evening, her face forgot its audience, only for a second. Then the sorrow returned, perfectly placed. "This is very emotional," Marla said, voice trembling just enough. "And I understand why people may be confused. Rescue records are complex. Dogs come through difficult channels. Sometimes appearances." "His name is Bishop," Tessa said. Her voice cut across the room without needing the microphone. She stepped forward, holding the old photograph from Summit Response Dogs. Her red rescue jacket looked stark among the cream tablecloths and pine garlands. "I'm Tessa Langford, formerly of Summit Response Dogs. This German Shepherd was trained for disaster response, avalanche and collapse search. He disappeared during a subcontracted transport. Bright Acre had no legal ownership of him." The crowd shifted. Marla's eyes moved to Tessa, then briefly to Warren. Warren's phone lit up in his hand. He glanced down. His expression changed. Caleb saw it. Not guilt, alarm. At the same time, Nolan's phone buzzed. The sheriff looked at the screen, read for 2 seconds, and slid the phone back into his pocket. His posture changed almost invisibly. The lid over the boiling water lifted. Marla reached for the microphone. "This is deeply unfair. Deeply. Dr. Vale has had concerns about our work for some time, and I respect professional disagreement. But to bring an animal here under uncertain circumstances, an animal purchased from an unstable transporter, I might add, and turn a sacred evening into an accusation?" She looked at the audience, not at Miriam. That was her gift. She knew how to make the crowd feel accused before anyone had named the crime. "I know people want villains," Marla continued softly, "but rescue is messy. Records fail. Volunteers misunderstand. And sometimes those who do the hardest work become targets of suspicion from those who only see the edges." A few faces in the room wavered. Caleb saw it happen. Good people retreating toward the easier story. The room wanted the warm lights back, wanted the cookies and the donation envelopes, and the belief that compassion, once purchased, stayed clean. Joelle made a small movement near the hallway. Miriam saw her and shook her head slightly. "Not yet." Joelle stopped, trembling. Marla's gaze swept across the room. "We have nothing to hide." Nolan stepped forward then. "Good," he said. The single word landed harder than accusation. Marla turned. "Sheriff?" Nolan's voice stayed calm. "State animal welfare officers are at Bright Acre now, conducting a limited inspection based on veterinary transport concerns and sworn statements." The room broke into murmurs. Warren swore under his breath and moved toward the side exit. Caleb saw him. So did Nolan. "Warren," Nolan said. Warren kept walking. A deputy by the rear wall, quiet until then, broad-shouldered, young but steady, stepped in front of the door. Warren stopped, face darkening. His phone buzzed again. This time he did not hide the panic. "They had no right," Warren snapped. Marla's face turned toward him slowly. It was a dangerous look, not fear, calculation. "Warren," she said softly, "please don't make this worse." That was when he broke. "Don't you put this on me," he shouted. "I moved what you told me to move." Gasps rippled through the room. Marla's face went pale beneath the golden light. Nolan walked toward Warren, one hand lowered but ready. "Keep talking if you want, but you're going to do it outside." Warren backed away from the deputy and, in that confused moment of trapped anger, looked for the one creature in the room he still thought he could frighten. His eyes locked on Hawthorne. He moved toward him. Not a charge. Not yet. Just 3 hard steps, hand lifting as if the old pattern could still command the old fear. Caleb stepped forward at once, but Hawthorne moved first. The German shepherd trembled so violently that his harness shifted along his shoulders. His injured leg quivered. Every memory in his body must have known that hand, that shape, that old permission given to cruelty. But he did not retreat. He stepped in front of Caleb, then slightly in front of Miriam, then held the line, his head lowered. His ears stood unevenly, the torn left one catching the light. His eyes fixed on Warren. The hall had gone silent enough to hear the heating system in the walls. Warren stopped. For 1 second, the old power between them tried to rise from the floor like a ghost. Hawthorne answered it with one bark. Not wild, not frantic. One deep, short sound that struck the room like a gavel against wood. Enough. The word was not spoken. Everyone heard it anyway. Warren flinched. That was the thing Caleb would remember later. Not Marla's face, not the gasps, not even the bark. Warren flinched, because the dog he had known as broken had refused to break again. Nolan and the deputy moved then. Warren was turned, controlled, and taken toward the side door while he spat half-formed blame at Marla, at Bright Acre, at stupid volunteers, at anyone but himself. Nolan's phone buzzed once more before he followed them out. He read the message aloud, not for drama, but because the room needed fact more than performance. Multiple dogs located in the rear shed, several requiring immediate veterinary care. Unlogged sedatives found in the auxiliary office. Transport records seized. No one spoke. Marla stood beneath the lights she had arranged, surrounded by photographs of suffering she had made profitable. Her eyes moved across the crowd and found, one by one, people who had believed her. For the first time, belief did not come back. Miriam lowered her folder to her side. Tessa stood beside Bishop, with the old photograph still in her hand. Joelle, near the hallway, began to cry without covering her face. Marla was not handcuffed in front of everyone. Nolan did not give her that martyrdom. 2 state officers entered quietly through the front doors a few minutes later and asked her to come with them for questioning. Her lips parted, as if she might make one final appeal to mercy. But the word had lost its shelter. She walked out under the golden lights without applause. Afterward, the town hall did not erupt into celebration. No one cheered. No one clapped Caleb on the back. No one shouted that justice had been done, because justice, when it finally enters a room where people have been fooled, often feels less like victory than grief. The cookies sat untouched. Donation envelopes lay stacked beside the coffee urn. On the screen behind the microphone, K-17 still stared from his old photograph, declared dead by people who had not had the right to name him anything at all. Caleb looked down. Hawthorne Bishop stood breathing hard, but steady. Caleb crouched beside him. "You held." The dog turned his head slightly toward him. Tessa stepped closer and, with Caleb's nod, lowered the old Summit photograph to the floor where Bishop could see it. The dog sniffed it once, then looked away toward the doors where Warren had been taken. Not chasing, not collapsing, just standing. Miriam came to Caleb's other side. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "We need to get to the dogs," she said. Caleb nodded. Around them, the townspeople remained in stunned silence, their warm evening broken open. Some stared at the screen. Some looked at the dog. Some looked at the floor, where their own good intentions had suddenly become complicated. Outside, snow fell beyond the town hall windows, soft and bright, covering the sidewalks in white. Inside, the lie had stopped being beautiful. And for that night, that was enough. Whitefish did not become peaceful overnight. That was the first mercy of the truth. It did not pretend to be a fairy tale. The morning after the fundraiser, the town woke under a thin veil of new snow, the kind that made roofs look forgiven before anyone inside had earned it. Main Street opened slowly. The bakery lit its ovens. The plow trucks scraped along the curbs. People came for coffee, mail, prescriptions, fuel. And everywhere, in softened voices, they spoke of Brightacre. Some were angry because they had been lied to. Some were ashamed because they had believed too quickly. Some were defensive, which was shame wearing a coat too small. At Juniper Grill, Ruth Mallory took down the Brightacre donation jar from beside the register and placed it beneath the counter without ceremony. When a man in a feed store cap said, "Well, how were we supposed to know?" Ruth poured his coffee, looked him in the eye, and said, "By asking one more question before writing a check." The man said nothing after that. At North Lantern Veterinary Clinic, the phone did not stop ringing. Some calls came from people offering blankets, food, crates, money. Some came from people demanding to know whether the dog they adopted from Brightacre had been part of it. Some came from donors who wanted their names removed from Brightacre's old newsletter archive, as if embarrassment could be treated like a stain and scrubbed from paper. Miriam Vale answered what she could and ignored what deserved silence. By noon, the first rescued dogs arrived. Not all of them came to North Lantern. Several were taken to licensed shelters in Kalispell and Missoula. A few needed emergency care at larger facilities. But the ones brought to Miriam came through the back entrance, away from the front windows and curious eyes. Caleb was there before sunrise with tools in his truck. He did not ask what needed doing. He saw it. The old storage building behind the clinic had once held extra kennels, broken chairs, winter tires, and a lawnmower Miriam had not used in 3 years. By 8 o'clock, Caleb had the doors open, the junk hauled out, and a temporary heater running from a safe line he installed himself. He checked the vents twice, then a third time. He laid down rubber mats, patched a draft beneath the west wall, and rigged a simple gate so dogs could enter one at a time without facing each other too soon. "Temporary," Miriam said, standing in the doorway with a clipboard and hollow eyes. Caleb tightened a screw. "Most good things start that way." She looked as if she might answer, then decided the words would cost too much. A Labrador from the truck cages arrived first. The old dog with the scraped muzzle. He did not walk in so much as surrender to being guided. His coat was dull, his eyes cloudy, and every time a boot scraped behind him, his shoulders sank. Miriam knelt beside him for almost 10 minutes before touching him. No speech, no performance. Just presence offered until the dog's breathing changed. Caleb watched from the heater. Hawthorne stood beside him. Or Bishop. Both names now lived in the room, and neither seemed large enough alone. The German Shepherd wore a soft leather collar Tessa had brought that morning. It was not new exactly. Tessa had found it in an old Summit Response Dog storage bin, then had a local engraver add a 2-sided tag. On the front, in clean letters, it read, Hawthorne. On the back, Bishop Summit Response Dogs. Caleb had turned the tag over in his hand for a long time before fastening it. A dog should not have to choose between the name that found him and the name that had been stolen. Hawthorne stood quietly while Caleb buckled the collar. Not frozen, not afraid. Simply still, as if understanding that this circle around his neck did not close like a rope. It rested, it named, it did not claim by force. When the old Labrador whimpered, Hawthorne lifted his head. Miriam noticed, "Careful." "I know." But Hawthorne did not approach. He only lay down near the far wall, not blocking the door this time, not guarding Caleb, just visible, breathing slow, calm enough for another animal to borrow the idea. The Labrador watched him. After a while, the old dog lowered his head onto the blanket. Miriam exhaled. Caleb saw her blink quickly and turn away. The days that followed had no music in them, no sweeping celebration, no triumphant headline that could hold the truth without flattening it. There were statements, charges, hearings scheduled, Bright Acres accounts frozen. Marla Voss questioned by investigators while reporters learned how to pronounce animal welfare fraud with the solemnity of people discovering that cruelty could wear nonprofit paperwork. Warren Pike faced charges tied to transport violations, obstruction, and direct abuse documented through witness statements, veterinary records, and footage from Ruth's diner. But the real work was quieter. One Malinois refused to eat if anyone stood over her. A shepherd mix could not sleep unless the lights stayed dim. A hound barked himself hoarse at the sound of a truck backing up near the alley. Miriam did not call them dramatic. She did not call them difficult. She wrote, trauma response, environmental trigger, gradual desensitization, monitor hydration, slow trust protocol. Caleb learned the language. He learned which dog needed the bowl placed near the left wall, which one tolerated women before men, which one did better if Hawthorne lay nearby but not too close. He rebuilt the old shed into something more permanent, one repair at a time. Insulated wall panels, a second heater, quiet latches that did not clang, separate runs with partial visual barriers, a small fenced path outside where dogs could feel air without being stared at. One afternoon, Sheriff Nolan Creed arrived, carrying a wooden sign under one arm. He looked tired, more tired than he had the night of the fundraiser. Public truth had a way of aging a man who had once settled too easily for private suspicion. He stood beside the newly repaired gate while Caleb wiped sealant from his hands. Council approved the fund, Nolan said. Miriam, who had been logging medication doses, looked up. The North Lantern Recovery Fund? She asked. Nolan nodded. Public ledger. Independent oversight. Adoption follow-ups required. No staged rescue media without medical clearance and handler approval. Ruth, who had come by with 3 pots of soup and enough biscuits to feed a road crew, snorted from the doorway. Imagine that. Helping without putting on a pageant. Nolan gave her a dry look. You want to hang the sign or heckle the government? I can do both. The sign was simple pine, painted in dark letters. No life is fundraising material. Every rescue must be accountable. For a moment, no one moved. The words looked plain. That made them stronger. Caleb held the ladder while Nolan climbed 2 steps and fixed the sign above the gate. The sheriff's bad knee complained on the way down. He hit it poorly. Miriam saw anyway. You should have that looked at, she said. Nolan grunted. Town's full of doctors now? Only one with patients left. Ruth laughed. And for the first time in days, the sound did not feel out of place. Joelle Mercer came later, carrying a cardboard box of printed records she had organized by date. She had given her formal statement that morning. Her face was pale, but she did not hover near the exit as she used to. She stood in the center of the room with the box in her arms, as if accepting that shame was heavy but not fatal. I can label intake folders, she said. Miriam studied her. You do understand this is supervised? Yes, and not public-facing. I don't want to be public-facing. And no cameras unless specifically approved. Joelle swallowed. I sold enough pain with a lens. The room quieted. Miriam's expression softened by a degree, which for her was nearly an embrace. Put the box on the desk, she said. Start with transport dates. Joelle nodded. Before she passed Caleb, she looked down at Hawthorne. The dog watched her, calm but not inviting. Joelle did not reach for him. I'm sorry, she whispered. The German shepherd blinked. Caleb did not tell her that dogs forgave. People said that too easily. Dogs remembered. Dogs adapted. Dogs sometimes trusted again if humans became consistent enough to deserve the risk. Forgiveness was not a trick they performed to make guilty people feel clean. Joelle seemed to understand. She wiped her cheek once and went to the desk. That evening, when the work had thinned and the clinic had become quiet except for the low hum of heaters and the shifting of recovering dogs, Miriam found Caleb outside beside the new fenced run. Snow was falling lightly. He stood with both hands in the pockets of his canvas jacket, watching Hawthorne move through the fresh powder. The dog stepped carefully, then paused, nose lifted toward the darkening sky. Snow collected along his back. Under the yard light, the 2-sided tag at his neck flashed once, then settled. Miriam stood beside Caleb. For a while, neither spoke. This silence was different from the first ones between them. It no longer had the awkwardness of strangers measuring each other's wounds. It had become the silence of people who had worked through exhaustion in the same room and no longer needed to prove they understood the cost. He looks stronger, Miriam said. He is. So do you. Caleb glanced at her. She kept her eyes on the dog. A little. That your professional opinion? No. If it were professional, I would bill you. He almost smiled. The snow thickened in the light between them. Hawthorne turned and looked back at Caleb, not urgently, not as a guard dog checking a perimeter, but as a companion making sure the old pattern still held. I am here. You are there. The world has not shifted under us. Caleb looked down at Miriam's hands. They were red from washing, scratched from frightened animals, steady, despite the long day. You planning to sleep? He asked. Eventually. That mean no? That means eventually. He nodded. Coffee? She gave him a tired look. If you bring me coffee, I might mistake that for kindness. It is kindness. Dangerous habit. Too late. Her smile was small, but real enough to warm something no furnace could reach. Nothing more happened. No confession. No hand reaching for another under falling snow. No music swelling in the rafters of the world. Just 2 tired people standing outside a clinic full of wounded animals, discovering that care, repeated often enough, could become a language. A week later, Tessa returned to finalize the adoption paperwork. She spread the documents across Miriam's front desk, each page marked with careful tabs. Summit Response Dogs released any remaining claim. The transport loss report was updated. Bishop's file, once marked unresolved, now carried a new notation. Located alive, retired to private care, honorary recovery status. Tessa handed Caleb the pen. He looked down at Hawthorne, who sat beside his left leg, calm in the clinic light. "You sure?" Tessa asked. Caleb signed. "Wasn't a question after the first night." Tessa took the papers back, but her hand lingered over Bishop's old photograph. "He was a good search dog." Caleb looked at her. "He still searches." "For what?" Caleb watched Hawthorne turn his head toward the recovery room, where the old Labrador had begun, slowly, to eat with a person nearby. "Proof people can change," Caleb said. Tessa's eyes lowered. "That's harder terrain than avalanche fields." "Yes," Caleb said, "it is." The final evening came quietly, as most true endings do. Caleb drove home along the lake road while snow drifted through the headlights. Hawthorne sat in the passenger seat, no longer curled tight, no longer tracking every shadow with exhausted suspicion. His head rested low, eyes half open. The tag at his collar clicked softly whenever the truck turned. At the cabin, Caleb opened the passenger door. Hawthorne stepped down, sniffed the cold air, and looked across the frozen lake. The sky had gone deep blue, almost violet, and the pines stood black against it. No truck waited in the drive. No angry man in a dirty jacket. No rope. No shout. Only home. Caleb unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The cabin was warm. The stove held a low fire. The hallway beyond the living room remained dark. For weeks, Hawthorne had chosen the place between the front door and that hallway. The watch point. The old duty. The line he could not stop holding. Tonight, he stood there for a moment. Caleb did not speak. He did not coax, did not command, did not make the choice a ceremony. Hawthorne looked at the door, then at the hall, then at Caleb. After a long breath, the German Shepherd walked past the guard spot, crossed to the stove, turned in a slow circle, and lowered himself onto the rug, near the fire. Not between danger and sleep, near warmth. Caleb remained by the door, one hand still on the knob. The shift was so small that no crowd would have understood it. No donor would have funded it. No caption could have held it without making it cheap. But Caleb understood. A wall inside the house had moved. He took off his boots, hung his jacket, and sat on the floor beside the stove, a few feet from Hawthorne. As always, he did not reach first. His hand rested open on his knee. After a while, Hawthorne lifted his head and placed his muzzle gently into Caleb's palm. Outside, snow covered the old tire marks in the drive. Inside, the furnace Caleb had repaired hummed steadily beneath the floor, sending warmth through the cabin beams, through the walls, through the rooms that no longer felt quite so empty. Caleb looked at the dog, at Hawthorne, at Bishop, at the living soul who had carried two names through cruelty and come home with both. "No life is a prop," he said quietly. The dog breathed out. Caleb closed his fingers gently against the side of his muzzle. Compassion, he understood now, was not the tear someone shed before a photograph. It was the record kept. The door opened. The heater fixed. The bowl filled again tomorrow. It was the courage to ask where the money went, where the dog went, who signed the paper, who looked away. It was staying after the lights went out, when mercy was no longer beautiful, only necessary. The fire settled lower. Hawthorne slept. And for once, Caleb did not keep watch over the door. True compassion is not the feeling we have when a sad story moves us. It is the choice we make afterward to ask one more question, to protect what cannot protect itself, and to stay when the work is no longer beautiful. Caleb and Hawthorne. Bishop remind us that mercy should never be a performance. It should be honest, patient, and brave enough to bring truth into the light. Maybe today, God is asking each of us to notice one quiet place where kindness needs action, not applause. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of courage, healing, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel. May peace find you where you are, and may your heart stay brave enough to choose what is right.